What happens when a Hollywood legend sits down for what should be a simple morning interview and finds himself facing off against a host who refuses to show respect? In just 30 seconds, one comment from Michael Strahan would ignite a confrontation so explosive that it would end with one of cinema's greatest icons walking off the set of Good Morning America, leaving the entire panel in stunned silence. The studio lights were bright that morning as Clint Eastwood settled into the chair across from the Good Morning America panel. He had come to talk about his latest film, a passion project decades in the making. Robin Roberts smiled warmly from her seat while George Stephanopoulos shuffled his notes. But it was Michael Strahan, sitting front and center, who seemed ready to steer the conversation in a different direction entirely. "So Clint," Strahan began, not even waiting for the proper introduction, "let's talk about your age. You're what, pushing 95 now?" Eastwood's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained calm. 94, actually, but I'm not sure what that has to do with the film." "Well, I mean," Strahan continued, leaning back in his chair with a smirk, "a lot of people are wondering if maybe it's time to, pass the torch. Let younger filmmakers have their moment." Robin Roberts shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Michael, I think we should focus on the movie itself. Clint, tell us about the story behind this film." But Eastwood was still looking at Strahan, his famous squint narrowing. "Pass the torch? I've been making films since before you were born, and I'll keep making them as long as I have stories to tell." Sure, Strahan said, waving his hand dismissively. "But don't. You think Hollywood has moved past the kind of movies you make? I mean, they're so old-fashioned." "So yesterday," George Stephanopoulos jumped in quickly, "I actually think there's a timeless quality to Clint's work. The themes are universal." "Timeless?" Strahan laughed. "That's a nice way of saying outdated. Look, I'm just being honest here. When was the last time one of your movies really connected with young people, with the culture?" Eastwood's expression remained stoic, but there was a fire building behind his eyes. "My films connect with people who appreciate good storytelling, people who understand nuance and character. Not everything needs to be flashy and loud to be meaningful." "See, that's exactly what I'm talking about," Strahan said, pointing at him. "That whole back-in-my-day attitude. The world has changed, man. Maybe you haven't noticed from wherever it is you've been hiding." Robin Roberts' eyes widened. "Michael, that's completely uncalled for." "What? I'm just asking the questions people want answered," Strahan shot back. "Someone has to be real here." Eastwood leaned forward slightly. "You want real? Here's real. I came here to discuss a film I spent 3 years making. A film about sacrifice, honor, and what it means to stand up for something bigger than yourself. But instead, you're more interested in trying to make me look like some relic who doesn't belong anymore." "I'm not trying to make you look like anything," Strahan said. "I'm just pointing out facts. Your last few movies barely made any money. Critics have been pretty harsh. Maybe it's time to admit that your moment has passed." George Stephanopoulos set down his cards. "Michael, this is a guest on our show. We need to show some respect." "Respect?" Strahan turned to George. "I respect his past work, but that doesn't mean I have to pretend like everything he does now is gold. That's not journalism. That's cheerleading." Eastwood's voice remained steady, but there was steel in it now. "You know what real journalism is? It's doing your homework. It's understanding your subject. It's asking questions that illuminate rather than demean. You've done none of those things." "Oh, here we go," Strahan said, rolling his eyes. "The lecture from the old-timer. Look, I've interviewed hundreds of people. I know what I'm doing." "Then act like it," Eastwood replied firmly. Robin Roberts tried again to salvage the situation. "Clint, why don't you tell our viewers about the incredible cast you assembled for this project?" But Strahan wasn't finished. "Before we get to that, I want to circle back. You've made some comments in the past about Hollywood being too political, too woke, whatever that means. Do you think maybe that attitude is why people have stopped caring about your movies?" Eastwood took a deep breath. I've said that I believe films should focus on telling human stories, not pushing agendas. That's not controversial. That's craftsmanship. Right. But what you call craftsmanship, a lot of people call being out of touch. Strahan pressed. The industry has evolved. It's more inclusive now, more representative, and you seem to have a problem with that. I have. No problem with inclusion, Eastwood said, his patience clearly wearing thin. I have a problem with people like you putting words in my mouth and twisting what I believe to fit whatever narrative you're trying to sell. Strahan laughed again, a sound that was becoming increasingly grating. I'm not twisting anything. I'm reading between the lines. It's pretty clear where you stand. Is it? Eastwood's voice was quiet now, dangerous. Because from where I'm sitting, the only thing that's clear is that you invited me here under false pretenses. This isn't an interview. It's an ambush. George Stephanopoulos looked at the producers off camera. Maybe we should take a quick break. No, Strahan said firmly. We're live. We're doing this. Clint, I think viewers deserve to hear you defend your positions. You've had a long career, sure, but you've also said some things that haven't aged well. Don't you think you owe people an explanation? Eastwood stood up slowly, his full height commanding the space. I don't owe you anything, and I certainly don't owe you an explanation for beliefs you've invented for me. Sit down, Strahan said, his tone shifting to something more aggressive. We're not done here. Yes, Eastwood said quietly, reaching up to remove his microphone. We are. Robin Roberts stood as well, her voice pleading. Clint, please, let's just reset. We can start over. But Eastwood shook his head, his eyes never leaving Strahan. I've been in this business for over 60 years. I've sat through thousands of interviews. I've answered every kind of question imaginable. But I've never, not once, been treated with such blatant disrespect. Disrespect? Strahan stood now too, his voice rising. I'm asking you tough questions. That's my job. If you can't handle it, maybe you're not as tough as your movies make you out to be. The studio fell completely silent. Even the crew members had stopped moving. Eastwood's voice when he spoke was like gravel. Tough questions are fine, I welcome. But what you're doing isn't tough. It's cheap, it's lazy, and it's beneath what this show used to represent. Used to represent? Strahan stepped closer. What's that supposed to mean? It means that Good Morning America used to be about intelligent conversation, Eastwood replied. About giving people a platform to share their work and their ideas. Not about ambushing guests to score points. George Stephanopoulos moved between them. Gentlemen, please, we're on live television. Then maybe America should see what really goes on here, Eastwood said, his microphone now completely removed and handed to a stunned production assistant. Maybe they should know that you bring people on this show not to celebrate their work, but to tear them down. Strahan's face flushed red. Nobody's tearing you down. You're being overly sensitive. Can't take a little criticism? Criticism? Eastwood's voice rose for the first time. You haven't criticized my work. You've insulted my age, dismissed my relevance, and questioned my character. That's not criticism. That's a hit job. Robin Roberts had tears in her eyes now. Clint, I am so sorry. This isn't how we do things here. Please, let me ask you about the film. Eastwood looked at her with genuine warmth. Robin, you've always been a class act. This isn't about you. He turned back to Strahan. But I won't sit here and be disrespected by someone who clearly has an agenda. Agenda? Strahan laughed harshly. The only agenda I have is getting to the truth. If you can't handle that, then leave. That's exactly what I'm going to do, Eastwood said, turning toward the exit. Strahan called after him. You're just proving my point. Walking away when things get tough. Very heroic. Eastwood stopped, turned back one more time. You want to know what's heroic? Spending 3 years of your life making something you believe in, knowing that people like you will try to tear it down before anyone even sees it. That's heroic. Sitting in a comfortable chair, throwing cheap shots at your guests, that's cowardice. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. You can't talk to me like that, Strahan said, his voice shaking with anger. I'm the host of this show. Then act like it, Eastwood replied. Act like someone who deserves that position. Show some dignity. Show some respect. Because right now, you're showing America exactly the kind of person you are, and it's not pretty. George Stephanopoulos tried one more time. Clint, please, we can fix this. Just sit back down and we'll start fresh. But Eastwood was already walking toward the edge of the set. Some things can't be fixed, George. Some things are broken beyond repair. Robin Roberts followed him a few steps. Clint, your film. Tell people where they can see it, please. Eastwood paused at the edge of the stage, turned to face the camera directly. The film opens nationwide next Friday. For anyone who appreciates stories about real people facing real challenges with dignity and courage, I hope you'll give it a chance. For everyone else, he glanced at Strahan, there's plenty of other content out there to keep you entertained. That's it, Strahan shouted. You're just going to walk away? That's exactly what I'm going to do, Eastwood confirmed. Because unlike you, I know when a conversation has run its course. I know when to stand up and leave. And I know the difference between a real interview and whatever this was supposed to be. Strahan moved toward him. You don't get to decide when this is over. I decide that. Eastwood looked at him with something like pity. No, you don't. That's what you don't understand. You can control when the cameras turn on, but you can't control how people respond to the dawn, a way you treat them. You can ask provocative questions, but you can't force people to endure abuse. And you can call yourself a journalist all you want, but that doesn't make it true. Get out then, Strahan said, his voice cold. We don't need you here anyway. Finally, Eastwood said, quietly, something we can agree on. As he walked off the set, the cameras captured Robin Roberts standing with her hand over her mouth, George Stephanopoulos staring at his shoes, and Michael Strahan standing alone in the center of the stage, his face a mask of fury and something else, something that looked like the first crack of realization that maybe, just maybe, he had gone too far. The silence that followed was deafening. The producers were frantically gesturing from behind the cameras. The crew members looked at each other with wide eyes. Nobody seemed to know what to do next. Robin Roberts was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. We need to go to commercial. No, Strahan said firmly. We're not going to commercial. We're going to finish this show. Michael, George said carefully, I think we need a moment to regroup. I said. We're finishing the show, Strahan repeated, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Clint Eastwood just walked off our set. Fine, good riddance. We'll move on to the next segment. But Robin Roberts wasn't having it. No, Michael, we're not just moving on. What just happened here was wrong, and everyone watching knows it. What are you talking about? Strahan turned to her, his face still flushed. I asked him legitimate questions. You attacked him, Robin said, her voice stronger now. From the very first question, you attacked him. His age, his relevance, his grody beliefs. That's not journalism, that's cruelty. George nodded. She's right, Michael. You crossed a line. Oh, so now you're both against me too? Strahan's voice rose again. I'm the one trying to do real journalism here, while you two just want to lob softballs and make everyone feel good. There's a difference between asking tough questions and being deliberately antagonistic, George replied, and you know it. I don't have to listen to this, Strahan said, looking around wildly. Where's the producer? Someone tell them to cut to commercial. But Robin Roberts stepped forward, positioning herself in front of the main camera. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to apologize for what you just witnessed. That was not reflective of the values of this show or this network. Clint Eastwood came here as our guest, and he deserved better than what he received. Robin, what are you doing? Strahan demanded. You can't just apologize for me. I'm not apologizing for you, Robin said, turning to face him. I'm apologizing to our viewers and to Clint. You can apologize for yourself, or not. That's your choice. The tension on the set was palpable. Every person in the studio was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Strahan looked at the cameras, then back at Robin and George. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Uncertainty, perhaps, or maybe the beginning of regret. But then his jaw set, and he shook his head. "I have nothing to apologize for," he said. "I did my job. If Clint Eastwood couldn't handle a real conversation, that's on him, not me." Robin Roberts looked at him with something like sadness. "Then I guess we really don't have anything more to say to each other right now." She walked off the set, leaving Strahan standing there with George. George looked at his co-host for a long moment. "You know what the worst part of this is, Michael? You had a chance to talk to a living legend, someone who's seen and done things most of us can only dream about. And instead of learning from him, instead of showing him the respect he's earned, you decided to make it about you, about proving how tough you are, how unafraid you are to ask hard questions. But there's nothing tough about what you did today, nothing brave about it. It was just mean." With that, George walked off too, leaving Strahan alone on the set. The cameras were still rolling. The producers were screaming into their headsets. But for that moment, Michael Strahan stood completely alone in the bright lights of the Good Morning America studio, the reality of what had just happened finally beginning to sink in. He opened his mouth to say something, anything, but no words came out. What could he say? How could he explain what had just happened? How could he justify the way he'd treated a man who had earned decades of respect in his field? A production assistant finally ran onto the set with a piece of paper. "We're going to commercial," she said quickly. "Right now." Strahan nodded mutely, his earlier bravado completely gone. As the lights dimmed and the cameras cut away, he sank into his chair, his head in his hands. Backstage, Clint Eastwood was already gone. He'd walked straight out of the building without looking back, without saying another word to anyone. His publicist was on the phone, her voice tight with anger as she spoke to network executives. His assistant was gathering his belongings. Robin Roberts found them in the hallway. "I am so sorry," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "That should never have happened. That's not who we are." Eastwood looked at her kindly. "I know it's not who you are, Robin, but maybe it's who the show has become. Maybe it's time to ask yourself if this is still where you want to be." The words were gentle, but their impact was clear. Robin nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face now. "Go make your film," Eastwood said. "Tell your stories. Do it with integrity and respect, and don't let anyone make you compromise those values. Not for ratings, not for relevance, not for anything." Then he was gone, walking out into the morning sunlight, leaving behind a studio in chaos and a host who had learned, perhaps too late, that there are some lines you simply don't cross. Back on the set, as the commercial break ended, Strahan sat alone. George and Robin had not returned. The producers were scrambling to fill the rest of the show with pre-recorded segments. And somewhere in America, millions of viewers were watching, judging, and deciding for themselves who had been in the right. The morning had started like any other. Bright lights, cheerful music, the promise of easy conversation and feel-good stories. But in just 30 seconds, with just one dismissive comment about age and relevance, everything had changed. A Hollywood icon had been pushed too far. A host had revealed his true colors. And a show that prided itself on bringing people together had instead driven them apart. As Strahan sat there in the glaring studio lights, trying to figure out what to say when the cameras came back on, one thing was becoming very clear. He had won the battle, he had kept control of his set, he had refused to back down. But in doing so, he had lost something far more important. He had lost the respect of his colleagues. He had lost the trust of his viewers, and he had lost any claim to the moral high ground he thought he'd been standing on. The lesson was simple. Even if it came too late, you can be tough without being cruel. You can ask hard questions without attacking your guests. You can challenge people without disrespecting them. And if you forget those things, if you let your ego and your desire to be seen as edgy and unafraid cloud your judgment, then you might find yourself sitting alone under bright lights, wondering how it all went so wrong. Clint Eastwood had walked off the Good Morning America set that morning, but in truth, it was Michael Strahan who had lost everything that really mattered. The show would go on, the cameras would keep rolling, the music would keep playing, but everyone who had been there, everyone who had witnessed what happened, knew that something had broken, something that might never be fixed. And as Eastwood drove away from the studio, his phone already ringing with calls from supporters and well-wishers, he felt no regret. He had stood up for himself. He had refused to be bullied or diminished. He had walked away from a toxic situation with his dignity intact. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to participate. Sometimes, the strongest statement you can make is to stand up and walk away, and sometimes, the only way to win is to recognize when the game itself is rigged and to simply stop playing. Clint Eastwood had learned these lessons over a lifetime in Hollywood. He had faced down studio executives, survived changing trends, weathered criticism and praise with equal grace, and on that morning, in that studio, he had applied those lessons. One more time, he had walked away, and in doing so, he had proven exactly what Michael Strahan had tried so hard to deny. That class, dignity, and respect never go out of style. That true strength comes not from attacking others, but from knowing your own worth. And that some things, some principles, are worth standing up for, no matter what the cost. The cameras had captured it all. The disrespect, the confrontation, the dramatic exit. But what they couldn't capture was the deeper truth underneath it all. That in a world that increasingly values conflict over conversation, spectacle over substance, and provocation over respect, there are still people who refuse to play that game, who insist on being treated with dignity, who know that real toughness means standing up for what's right, even when it would be easier to sit down and take it. Clint Eastwood had shown them all what that looks like, and Michael Strahan, sitting alone in his chair, was left to contemplate what he had thrown away in his pursuit of a viral moment and tough guy credentials that now seemed hollow and meaningless. The morning sunlight streamed through the studio windows. The show's theme music played, life went on, but nothing would ever quite be the same again.